Değerli konuklar, sevgili izleyiciler, hepiniz hoş geldiniz. Öncelikle hepinizden çok özür diliyoruz. Seste yaşanan bir sıkıntıdan dolayı bir süre yayınımıza başlamakta güçlük çektik. Ama şu anda sizlerle biraz gecikmeyle de olsa birlikteyiz. Gerçekten de çok değerli, çok güzel bir konuyu bugün işliyor olacağız. Kendisini hayranlıkla takip ettiğim yazılarını, makalelerini, kitaplarını çok heyecanla okuduğum çok değerli bir hocamız bizlerle birlikte olacak. Ama yayının geri kalanına geçmeden önce çok kısa birkaç hatırlatmayı sizlerle paylaşmayı arzu ediyorum. Bize sorularınız olursa sorular sekmesinden iletebilirsiniz. Ben zamanımız yettiği ölçüde sorularınızı değerli hocamıza aktarmaya gayret edeceğim. Kaynaklar bölümünde bugün bahsedeceği konuyla ilgili hocamızın bizde bu sayıda yayınlanan çok taze bir makale var. Onu da indirebilirsiniz. Sizin için güzel bir okuma egzersizi olacağını düşünüyorum. Bugün bu etkinliği Harvard Business School'un MENA bölgesi işbirliğiyle yapıyoruz. MENA bölgesinin Executive Direktörü sevgili Esel Çekin de bizlerle birlikte olacak. Ben şöyle bir selam vermek üzere şimdi kendisini kısa bir süreliğine ekrana alayım. Esel, hoş geldin. Esel, soru cevap kısmında birlikte olacağız ama şöyle bir sana da selam vermek istedim. Şimdi seni backstage'de ağırlıyoruz. Birazdan hep birlikte güzel sorularla devam edeceğiz. Çok teşekkürler bizlerle birlikte olduğun için.
Çok teşekkürler.
Evet sevgili dostlar, değerli izleyiciler, şimdi bu noktadan itibaren müsaadelerinizle İngilizce kısma geçiyoruz. Eğer ki simultane tercümeyi dinlemeyi arzu ederseniz üstteki butonlardan, orijinal kısmından ve Türkçe kısmından istediğiniz seçeneği seçerek yayını Türkçe veya İngilizce izleyebilirsiniz. Ladies and gentlemen, today I have the utmost honor to host a really distinguished guest. According to my opinion and to me, he needs no introduction because he is a really elegant thinker. He is one of the most creative professors in Harvard Business School, and his work is focusing on strategy, innovation, and also value-based strategy. Today, I will be more than happy to introduce you Felix Oberholzer-Gee, the Andreas Anderson Professor of Business Administration in Harvard's Business School. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Felix to the stage. Felix, welcome.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Cedar. I'm delighted to be here. I'm sorry for making you wait this long. And I wanted to use the time that we have together to give you a little bit of a background story about my latest book, Better, Simpler Strategy. I will do this by sharing a few slides that I hope you can see in a minute.
I'm here to check if things are going well. Felix, just share the slides.
Yes, can you see the slide?
Yes, here we go. So I'm leaving the stage to you.
Okay, thank you very much. So what is the book about? The first thing that I would like you to take away is you have every reason to be wildly optimistic about the potential of your company to perform far better than you do today. Now, I know I'm an optimistic person myself, but this is actually not grounded in my personal optimism. This is grounded in the research and in the data that I looked at for this particular book. Here's the distribution of profitability for large companies in the United States. And you might think they're so big already. How much can they grow? How much better can they do? And as you look at the distribution, you see just how dramatically different financial performance is. And that is true for every country that I have ever looked at. I'm showing you here Brazil, China, India, South Korea, the United States. If we looked at Turkey, we would see exactly the same. We would have the same observation. The very best companies in every economy outperform their peers by significant margins. And you get to the same conclusion if instead of looking at it geography by geography, you look at it across different industries. So here you have lots of different industries, and the bars basically show you how much better does the best company do compared to the average company or compared to a company that is not doing so well. So optimism is insight number one. If you are approaching the companies in your industry that do really well, your own performance will improve dramatically. Increases in the return on invested capital by 20% are not out of the question for most companies most of the time. Now, of course, now you're curious about, well, so that's a nice message to hear, but how do you actually do it? And my first intuition was that, oh my God, this is going to be super complicated. Maybe these companies have amazing talent. Maybe these companies can do things that very few other companies can do. And I have to confess, I was a little surprised when my research showed that in the end, all of these companies, they do something very simple. They either increase willingness to pay for their customers, that is the maximum that customers will be willing to pay, or they decrease willingness to sell for employees and suppliers, where willingness to sell is the least amount that I need to offer someone in order to entice her to join my organization. Let me give you 3 stories. You might be familiar with South African insurance company Discovery. They offer discounted healthy foods in supermarkets. So you go to the supermarket, you're a Discovery insured, and all of a sudden you get to buy healthy foods at 50% discount, 60% discount, sometimes even 70% discount. Now, why does Discovery do this? Well, one is, of course, we all know if we have better eating habits, we're in better health, that lowers the cost of the insurance company. But more important than this direct effect is an indirect effect. Who is attracted by this kind of an initiative? Of course, it's the people who are health conscious to begin with. And as a result, you get a massive selection effect. You attract the customers that, in this particular case, are really inexpensive to serve. And that is true across all companies. Whenever you change willingness to pay, whenever you change willingness to sell, you get 2 effects. One is financial flexibility. If you have a better product, you get to charge premium prices. But maybe even more important is a selection effect. The people who will want to join your organization, your customers, your talent, are the very people you serve best. In some sense, it's really sort of an unfair advantage. You get to work with the people. You get to serve the customer that like you best to begin with. The Gap, a couple of years ago, had quite a terrible problem with churn. Many people in retail don't work for retail very long, and they go from one company to the next, and you retrain at significant cost. Now, what could the Gap have done? Well, it could have increased wages. It could have offered better training, maybe a more attractive career path, maybe better work processes in the organization. These are all the kinds of things that we think about when we think about how do we lower willingness to sell? How do we create better jobs? But the Gap tackled an issue that retailers typically don't care about. If you work in retail in the United States, you have very unpredictable hours. Typically, you only know about a week in advance when you will work and how many hours you will get. What did the Gap do? Super simple. Oh, it allowed people, with the help of an online app, to trade shifts. Oh, today my daughter has a concert at school. It's really not great if I have to go to work today. Let me offer my shift to someone else. Oh, now it's the end of the month. Maybe I would like to work some extra hours. Let me see on the shift messenger whether I can get additional hours. People traded tens of thousands of shifts with dramatic improvements in both employee health, employee stress, but important for the Gap, same-store sales and labor productivity. One last example. Roxul is a Japanese B2B company in printing services. Japan has so many printing companies. And in the beginning, Roxul is really just a website. I go there, I have a job for my business, and I pick someone who can print. And then the CEO thinks, well, wouldn't it be better, since there's very different equipment in printing, if we actually showed the customers who has the right equipment for your printing job? And they're starting matching the print jobs that customers have with the equipment that is right for the job. And then they're thinking, well, maybe we could also match customers with the right equipment and companies that happen to have not much work, lowering opportunity costs, lowering the cost of printing further. And then they went one step further and they started hiring Toyota engineers. And the Toyota engineers, because they're experts in continuous improvement, they went to these print shops and they helped reorganize the printing processes. What is happening here? Roxul customers get amazing quality, their willingness to pay sky high, and at the same time, they get it at really rock bottom prices because we're printing on the right equipment, the equipment that would have stood idle in the first place, and the equipment that is optimized as a result of continuous improvement. Do you notice what is happening here across all of these stories? Something really wonderful and something really simple. All of these companies, they increase willingness to pay and they decrease willingness to sell at one and the same time. As a result, delighted customers, very attractive work conditions and engaged employees, and all of these companies, significant profitability as a result of these activities. As I did the research for the book, I found so many of these stories. And across these stories, there were really 5 things that stood out for me. 5 things I learned in the process of writing the book. First, strategy is really simple. You know how sometimes you get this impression, oh, in order to do strategy, you have to be super senior. You need so much experience, gray hair, lots of wrinkles. No, nonsense. Don't let anyone fool you. You can be a successful strategist. All it takes is ideas how to create more value for your employees, for your customers, or for your suppliers. And you do this by increasing willingness to pay or decreasing willingness to sell. Done. There's nothing else. Second, what you saw in my examples, and which is generally true, all of these companies pursue just a few projects. If your company is typical, you have dozens of initiatives, dozens of projects. Everybody's running very fast. And often we don't really have much to show for it. Why? Because we're doing so many things that ultimately don't increase willingness to pay or don't decrease willingness to sell. If you see a project, if you see an idea that doesn't increase willingness to pay or decrease willingness to sell, say no. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of resources. Third, compete on selection. For every project that you have, not only ask, does it increase willingness to pay? Does it decrease willingness to sell? But also think about who is most attracted by the way we create value. Discovery is a great example. The health-conscious insured were most attracted to this offer. As a result, there was a positive selection effect. Fourth, we tend to think of our competitive advantage as coming from our product, relatively narrow. But in many of the examples that I researched, complements, products and services that increase willingness to pay for something else were actually really important. Food is a complement to health insurance. The app messenger and smartphones are a complement to better jobs and better working positions. So think about complements and think about opportunities to shift profit pools between complements. That is one recipe of success that many companies pursue today. And then finally, if you learned strategy a little while ago, you probably remember being stuck in the middle. And that was said to be the worst thing that could happen to a strategist. You don't really make up your mind whether you want an advantage in willingness to pay or whether you want an advantage in willingness to sell. You have a hard time making up your mind. Do I want to be premium? Do I want to be low cost? And as a result, you were stuck in the middle. And the advice was you can only do one. You can either have an increase in willingness to pay, and you can have a decrease in willingness to sell. And what I find, this advice is really poor advice. These days, companies do it all. Companies have an advantage in willingness to pay, and they have an advantage in willingness to sell at the same time. Have wild aspirations. Try your very best. Try to get dual advantages. Better willingness to pay, lower willingness to sell. And I'm ready for some Q&A, I think.
Felix, thank you very much. That was really eye-opening. When I first heard about willingness to sell and willingness to pay from one of your classes that I was lucky enough to join, I was really fascinated by this idea. And it is really applicable to everywhere, if I may say. It is really simple. It is really easy. So it's a really good way to put this through. And now I would like to invite SL to the screen. We have a couple of questions to you. SL, please go ahead. You start first.
Of course, thank you, Felix. It was a really super presentation. So you've been in Turkey many times, you know the companies and the business environment quite well. As you know, in the past 5-6 years, it has not been an easy business environment. And I wanted to ask, putting your strategies head and then considering the environment in Turkey, do you have any recommendations to business leaders in Turkey?
So, of course, it's true that Turkey is often in a difficult macroeconomic environment where we worry about exchange rates, where we worry about what happens with overall growth in the economy. But what I have found is that many of the difficulties that you perceive, oh my God, my business environment is difficult, or oh my God, I don't quite have the talent that I would like to have because education is not what we would aspire it to be. I find that many of these disadvantages turn into advantages for the very best companies. For instance, if I attract a particular talent pool and I'm asking, oh, how do I compete in an environment where first-rate education is not a forgiven conclusion? Well, actually, I can offer some on-the-job training. And as a result, I get exactly the people who love what I'm doing. There's a famous hospital group here in the United States that essentially uses training as a competitive advantage in the market for nurses. And what's the net result of that? Oh, the net result of that is to say, well, everyone you have on your staff is really interested in training. And I think the same in the Turkish environment, where sometimes we have a sense, oh, it's very hard to build a brand that has broad appeal. And then we look at the very best Turkish companies, and that's exactly what they do. They do it sometimes in the context of M&A. They sometimes do it in the context of internal brand building. And then, of course, it attracts the very customers that cherish a brand, that pay attention to brands. So I would say, yes, of course, always think about ways to increase willingness to pay or ways to decrease willingness to sell, but think about these selection effects, in particular in more complicated, in less stable environments, such as the Turkish environment, thinking about who are the customer groups that I can attract, who are the groups of talented people who I can attract, is often the foundation from which to build big business success.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the answer, Felix. My question is about creating societal value, because before COVID, as our business, we have been focusing on creating shared value or societal value while doing business, as we say it, doing well and doing good at the same time. How this value stick methodology can be applied to create more societal value?
So the first thing to say is, as business people, that's what we do every day, right? When you think about, like, if you do it right, if you in fact work for an organization that makes a positive contribution, what is your job every day? Your job every day is to think about what are ways to create value for customers, what are ways to create value for suppliers and the people in your organization. So in some sense, this idea of, oh, how does business create value for society it's pretty obvious that's what you do every day. And then the question is, of course, well, if we are taking this notion of stakeholder value seriously, what would we do differently? And I would say two things. The first one is you really take into account the social implications of your activities. Maybe most importantly at this point in time, in terms of climate change. We know that climate change will be a tremendous challenge over the next 10, 20 years for the next generation, certainly. So as a business, I'm not only thinking about what's my impact on customers, what's my impact on suppliers and talent, I'm also thinking about, am I actually making the problem of climate change worse? Am I buying offsets if my executives fly to destinations to see customers? And so on and so on. So think of the broader consequences. And then I think in addition to that, when you think about lowering willingness to sell, that's all about creating better jobs. And we know that better jobs are so important, not only because you as the person who has a better job, but because of all the spillovers, because of your ability to take care of your family, because of your ability to then make sure that the children have a better future. And so thinking about not only first-tier consequences, customers and employees, but thinking about what is my bigger impact on society, always looking through this prism, this lens of value creation. I think this is how value-based strategy can make a bigger contribution than just the contribution to financial performance.
Thank you very much, Felix. By the way, I'm just glancing at my browser here. I receive a really huge amount of questions, and I will be asking some of them to you if we have enough time at the last part of the event. And I can see some patterns here, which I expect, Felix. Especially questions are just coming for a more elaboration on willingness to sell part, which is a little bit difficult to comprehend than the willingness to pay, I guess. But we will be focusing on them in a short while. Now we have two guests. We have really two people from the Turkish business audience both of whom are really lifelong learners and strategy builders and strategy executioners. So without further ado, I would like to invite Cansel Başaran Symes to the stage to join us. Cansel Hanım, welcome. I think there is something wrong with the camera of Cansel Hanım. My colleagues will be dealing with that. And just before we switch to Cansel Hanım, maybe it will be a good idea for me to ask a really tiny question to you, Felix, which is, when I read your book and when I go through the examples that had created both willingness to pay and willingness to sell effect, most of them went through really significant and large transformations. Does it always have to be in that way? Do we need large transformations in order to have a substantial difference in willingness to pay and willingness to sell?
So very often when people first start out implementing value-based strategy, because you see so many opportunities to be better than you do today, I tend to see larger transformations. But in the end, I think it's really important to think of value-based strategy as a system that you implement and a system along which you can have continuous improvement. So, what we typically do in many organizations, that every 3 or 4 years, we're going through this massive restructuring, massive strategizing, trying to reinvent the organization. And frankly, after a little while, it just gets tiring to everyone. In fact, I know, why should I engage with the current change process if I know 1 year down the road, 2 years down the road, everything will be different again. And so in many organizations, we run the risk of just getting people really tired. And my natural inclination is, here's a new chief executive, here's a set of new ideas, and let me just duck and wait it out. In fact, we know from research that when companies embark on strategic initiatives, very often nothing actually happens. Everybody is really busy, but not much happens. Why? Because people know it's just one of many planned changes. So my recommendation is take value-based strategy seriously. embark on that path of true value creation, but then just coast along, having instituted a system of strategy that can actually serve you over very long periods of time. The idea that you serve your customers in a particular way, of course, will evolve because consumer tastes evolve, technology changes, but the basic notion of I'm very good at creating value for customers in a particular manner, that idea is not going to change. And so you get better buy-in and you get better results.
Let's try Johnson Hanım once again. Welcome back, Johnson Hanım.
Sorry, there was an electricity cut. Generator started, but in between I lost you. It's happening first time. I'm
Johnson
sorry.
Hanım, I think there is a retro of Mercury or something like that because things are going a little bit glitchy today. Hopefully we will carry on without any problem, but we'll be happy to hear your question and remarks on Felix' book and the methodology.
Thank you, Serdar. Felix, thank you very much for your sharp and wonderful presentation. As you rightly said in your book, increased expectations are everywhere, and simplicity opens up room for creativity and broad engagement for sure. And there is a big talk about revisiting and reshaping value propositions in the age of disruption and new business models. My question is, do you think there will be change the role of board members in this exceptional era?
Oh, it's such a great question, Johnson. And I see two things. The first is that for a little while, strategy and strategic decision making was almost delegated outside the organization. There was a lot of reliance on consulting firms. There was a lot of reliance on, management teams in a decentralized fashion, trying to implement strategy. And over the last, I would say, almost a decade now, I think boards have taken back this responsibility. So there's much deeper board involvement with setting strategic directions to begin with. But of course, as a board member, one of my challenges is always that I cannot possibly know all the details in the business. I cannot possibly know what does artificial intelligence mean for every single activity in a large organization. That's just impossible to know. And so what you need is a broad framework, a broad view that then can serve as a guiding principle to the executive team, but also to the frontline managers who are responsible for implementation. And one thing I really like about value-based strategies, that it can provide that simple formulation. Sometimes I see strategy decks that are, 80 pages. And I'm sure you have seen similar decks, Johnson, in your experience. And I'm always thinking, how are you going to explain this to anyone? It's impossible to take an 80-page deck and then expect everyone in the organization to act on it. And so if you have a simple foundation like value-based strategy, you actually have a chance of communicating. And so I would imagine that the boards will decide how exactly value is created. Do we want to do it for customers? Do we not want to do it for talent? What is the basic value proposition? But once you have those simple instructions, you can then delegate initiative, creativity, engagement to the front line, and you will see how things come alive in a way that feels coordinated and aligned.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johnson Hanım, for being with us today and sharing your question. Really appreciate your time and effort.
Thank you.
And now let's move to the second question, Felix. It is also coming from a really lifelong learner, a very curious executive who has got an academician background as well. So he is so much into digging down into issues. So he cannot be with us today live, but we recorded his question. Here comes the question from Mr. Ömer Aras, chairperson of QNB Finansbank.
First of all, I'd like to congratulate Professor Oberholzer for this great book that he published recently. strategy is a very important area, and simplifying that is even more important, because in today's complex environment, as he states in the book, the rapid change in technology, the global competition, and environmental issues are making the business world more complex on a daily basis. But this year, or this past year and a half, we have seen another complexity in our lives, that is the COVID-19. And COVID-19 changed the way we do business, the way we live, our social lives, everything. So that had an impact on how we cope with our organization strategies as well. So his methodology, or the model that he presents in his book about the willingness to pay and willingness to sell, and increasing the gap in between, is a very interesting and a nice approach, and a simple approach actually to understand the concepts. I would like to ask him whether that concept is how it's going to be, it should be affected with this COVID-19 impact on our lives, because now we're also facing people willingness to comply with the fight with COVID-19, the social distancing, the mask wearing, and also the vaccination, and all these things that change the way we do business, they change the way we prioritize our goals. So also obviously change some of the strategies. So how does he see the impact on the strategy of this major health issue that we have faced in a simple way, as he put it in his book? Thank you.
Another great question. Let me take one aspect of the COVID crisis, and that is the question whether you should call back people to work. So if you had a remote workforce during at least part of the pandemic, is it a good idea to ask everyone to come back? Should you have a hybrid model? Super complicated because so many things happen at the same time. My suggestion is just think about it as a result of considering changes in willingness to sell. If people are happier at work because they get to chat with their colleagues, obviously you can drive down willingness to sell by creating a better work environment. If people don't like their commutes, if people are actually totally fine working at home, you can drive down willingness to sell. You can create better jobs by allowing people, at least part-time, to work from home. And then you'll be thinking about productivity changes. We have now good evidence. The best evidence, I think, comes from IT, comes from financial services, that yes, people meet their targets at home, the same targets that they had prior to the crisis, but it takes them much longer. Why? Because I'm often interrupted. I'm often not quite as focused as I used to be at work. So productivity has actually declined in some businesses, and productivity has increased in other businesses. And so I want to think about all of these changes as a result of what's the impact on willingness to sell. If I find, say, that a hybrid model lowers willingness to sell, I'm going with a hybrid model. If I'm finding that in my particular business, productivity losses are so big that willingness to sell increases dramatically, I will call people back to work, and so on and so on. So rather than relying on trends, rather than looking around and seeing, oh, what does everybody else do? Everybody else seems to call back employees, or maybe not. Think about the changes that you expect with respect to value creation opportunities. And that is true for everything that we're uncertain about. Take changes in technology, which obviously played a role during COVID. Remember blockchain, maybe 10, 15 years ago? 80% of American companies had teams working on blockchain. Today, it's less than 10%. Why? Well, it turns out that once you think about blockchain in the context of your business, you can't change willingness to pay. You can't change willingness to sell. As a result, it's not something that you should be thinking about. And the same is true for every uncertain event. COVID, new technology, changes in consumer tastes. Always ask yourself this very simple question. Does it change anyone's willingness to pay? Does it change anyone's willingness to sell? And if the answer is no, that's an issue you can forget. That's a problem you don't have to think about. It frees up capacity to think about and enact the kinds of things that really matter to your organization.
Thank you very much, Felix. That was really a comprehensive approach to that. And a couple of questions from the audience, SL and Felix, if I will. A lot of questions about the notion of willingness to sell, Felix. Can you elaborate a little bit on willingness to sell part of it? Why it is important, and are there any good examples that you can give us that has got a solid willingness to sell advantage?
Yes. So willingness to pay is very intuitive, right? There's basically nothing I can tell you that you don't already know. You raise willingness to pay, then you get to charge premium prices, and as a result, you'll be more successful. Now, what's interesting about willingness to sell is that the same is true at the bottom of that figure that I showed. If you lower willingness to sell, you will be more attractive to employees and to suppliers. And as a result, you can decide how to share that value with them. And the example that I think makes the most sense is, think of someone who doesn't work for your company today, a good friend of yours who works for some other company. And now you would like this friend to move to your organization. And the question is, what's the minimum pay that you have to offer in order to make the person move? That minimum pay is the person's willingness to sell. And obviously it depends on the type of work. If the kind of work is really boring, uninspiring, well, guess what? The minimum compensation has to be pretty high. Willingness to sell goes up. If the work is amazingly interesting, oh, I don't have to offer that much money, willingness to sell goes down. Now, that doesn't mean that you pay less, of course. You might pay market, but it means that you're creating a ton of value for that person, that person is unlikely to leave, very likely to be highly engaged, very likely to have found a far better home than he or she has today. So thinking about willingness to pay is particularly important in the context of services. Why is this? Well, have you ever seen a business that provides excellent service without having engaged employees? No, of course not. So in a service economy, even in Turkey, more than 50% of GDP is services. So in a service economy, what you want is an advantage in competition for talent, because it's only if you have that advantage that you can then provide superior services. Otherwise, the superior services will just not come about.
Right. Thank you. I remember about the willingness to pay part of it. I remember a story that you told in your classes, and also in the recent article that you authored for Harvard Business Review, which is the flower story. That was really interesting one.
Yes, I'm happy to tell it. It's a personal story, and it goes to show that once you have an organization that is really committed to value-based thinking, the board will make different decisions. So the board question we just talked about, the executive team will make different decisions. But what's most interesting to me is these different decisions are visible everywhere in the organization. And the story is a story about a friend of mine who lives in Los Angeles, and I sent her flowers for her birthday. And then one year I forgot. I don't know exactly what happened. It's like I didn't pay attention to my calendar. So a couple of days after her birthday, I noticed, oh my God, her birthday, I didn't send flowers. So I called this flower store in LA. I place my order, and it's late in the day. So the salesperson asks, should we send the flowers this evening, or is it good enough if we send it tomorrow? And I say, well, it's a little embarrassing. I forgot my friend's birthday. So it'd be really great if you could send it as quickly as possible. And the salesperson asks, should we take the blame? Should we say it was our fault that the flowers didn't get sent? And of course, I didn't want her to lie for me, but I thought this is typical for businesses where everybody's thinking about value, where everybody's interested in creating more value for customers or for employees and suppliers all the time. And the story, of course, has a very predictable ending. I'm now getting an email reminder about my friend's birthday and the flower delivery. I order flowers probably at inflated prices, and I never thought about using another flower store. Why? Because I know they're thinking about my value. This is what I found across many research sites for the book. Once the customer really has a sense that you care about value creation for that customer, or once someone working for your organization really has a sense that you care about creating value for that particular person, you get loyalty. You get a kind of trust that is really hard to gain with other means. So value creation in a true sense just transforms the relationship that you have with your customers and the relationship that you have with your employees.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing this story, Felix. I really love this story. We are just coming at the end of our time. So, Esel, would you like to have final comments?
Well, thank you very much, Felix. This has been a pleasure. We really hope to have this event again in person soon when you can travel to Turkey.
Yes, I can't wait to be back in Turkey. It'll be at the very top of my list of destinations that I visit once it is safe to travel. So thank you, Serdar. Thank you, SL, for the kind invitation. This was a great fun for me. I hope engaging for the audience. And I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation about ever better ways to create value for everyone who touches your business. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Felix. Really eye-opening and insightful sharing of ideas, concepts, and answers. Really appreciate your time and effort. And I would like to apologize for the glitch that we had in the starting of the event. So with all saying that, I think we covered a lot of good parts about the strategy, how simpler it can be, how better it can be. So thank you very much for being with us today and sharing your perspective. Really appreciate, Felix. And ladies and gentlemen, I would like to conclude with that. And thank you very much for being with us today. And we all hope a really good and nice week for all of us.